Okie dokie. Michael J here. How you guys doing? And gals. Don't forget the gals. I got to remember the gals. So here, important video. This is about the United States of America, the economy, inflation, and the importance of building bridges, not walls. That is correct, folks. You heard me right. The importance of building bridges, not walls. You just did an election. Got to respect, the will of the people, which you have. No fraud. Nobody has claimed fraud and disrupted the transition of power, right? So I'm just going to point out the importance of building bridges and not walls. And I'll introduce Dr. Richard Wolff, an economist, formerly with Yale at some point in time, but Professor Emeritus at University of Massachusetts now. So questions, comments, you can always throw in chat. And this is just an excerpt. It's not the full video.
The inflation we just went through. That's a way of lowering the standard of living of large numbers of people, which they felt acutely as they went and paid $6 for a dozen eggs or everything else. They know they're suffering. My guess, no chance for Mr. Trump without that inflation. It gave him the victory, and it cost Kamala Harris the loss. But it's not the only thing. Let me give you other examples which an economist stares at with astonishment. The minimum wage at the federal level in the United States right now is $7.25 per hour, a sum of money on which nobody can live. When was the last time it was raised? 2009. That's 15 years ago. In every one of those 15 years, inflation raised the prices here in the United States of food, clothing, shelter, and everything else. Some years it went up a lot. Some years it went up only a little. But it went up. And what did we do to the people to whom we paid the lowest salary, $7.25? We didn't raise it. Republicans didn't raise it. Democrats didn't raise it. You know what that is? That's cruel and unusual punishment given to people whose crime is that they're poorly paid in the first place. What kind of a country does that? A declining empire whose rich and powerful are busy offloading the costs of that decline onto everybody else. Here's another sign. Our real wages have been stagnant for 30 to 40 years. In other words, if you measure, as we do in economics, the average wage in dollars paid to American workers, and you adjust that to the prices they have to pay when they spend their wages, it's been going up somewhere around 0.5% a year. That's called stagnation. That means your wage isn't going anywhere. By the way, in contrast, the average real wages in the People's Republic of China have quadrupled over the same 30 years. If you want to understand why the government in China is secure, why it is powerful, why economic growth there is celebrated, I just gave you the statistic. Their average wage quadrupled. The average wage in the United States went nowhere. That's not even close, friends. And if you didn't know that, since everything I'm telling you is easily verifiable in 1,000 government statistics, then you understand what I mean by denial. We are therefore experiencing in this country an extraordinary deepening of inequality. At the end of World War II, the United States was less unequal than European countries. Today, we are more unequal than every European country. How did that happen? Well, on the one hand, when corporations went to China and took advantage of low wages and a growing market, it made a fortune for those corporations and therefore for the top 10% of Americans who own shares. Just a footnote, the top 10% richest Americans own 80% of the stocks and bonds. They did well. The rest of us, we are experiencing a declining empire, which those at the top don't want you to think about. They're managing it quite well. We cannot. That inequality, together with the inflation, gives you Mr. Trump's victory. And the bitterness and divisiveness that is suffusing this economy. And still, nobody willing to face these realities or to speak about them. Let me conclude by telling you that this is important to understand not only as our past and not even only as our present, as in the election we just had, but also in our future. This denial, this refusal to face the realities of the economy we have and that is shaping our lives, and even more those of our children, promises us frightening near future. I'm only going to give you 2 examples because I don't want to overstay my welcome with you, but I do want to leave you with useful information to navigate the immediate future. Mr. Trump won the election because he positioned himself with dramatic gestures, the sort favored by Madison Avenue advertisers. And the 2 gestures were, I am the great protector. Mr. Trump understood far better than the Democrats that people feel attacked, undermined, frightened, scared, worried for themselves and their children, as well they should be. They glimpse fearfully where things are going. They want to be protected from it all. So he put himself forward as the great protector. And his 2 images were walls, the image of a protector. He's going to put a steel wall at the southern border to protect us against the invasion of the immigrants. And then he's going to put another wall, a tariff wall, to protect us against the evil Chinese. Very powerful images, very successful. But in terms of economics, total incoherent nonsense. Let me explain, and then I will conclude. We have 10 to 12 million undocumented immigrants. That's according to the Department of Homeland Security. We are a population of 330 million Americans. Do the math. 10 to 12 of the poorest people in the country, those immigrants, are not the explanation for the economic difficulties of this rich country of 330 million people. The very idea of that is ridiculous. An undergraduate who wrote such a thing would be called in by their teacher and told, try to think through what you're saying before you say it. The real economic problems, and they are real, of the United States have to do with what I just spent 20 minutes going over with you. They don't depend on more or less immigrants. On the other hand, if Mr. Trump now deports 5 or 10 of these 10 to 12 million immigrants, which he has threatened to do, there will be consequences. Why? Because undocumented immigrants are the most abused of our working class. An undocumented immigrant who asks for his pay on Friday afternoon and is told by his employer, sorry, I don't have the money, has no recourse. He can't go to the police. He's an undocumented immigrant. He doesn't want to get anywhere near any office of the government. He will not complain. He can't. He's like a slave. And that's how they're treated. The construction industry in this country is a major employer. If it doesn't have undocumented employees, it'll have to pay Americans. And you know what? It'll have to pay them a hell of a lot more than they're paying the terrified, undocumented immigrant. And that will mean the cost of construction will zoom up. And you know what that does? It worsens our inflation. Mr. Trump either can't do it for that reason, or he will produce an inflation that will overnight turn him from savior to demon in the eyes of his own followers. Then there's the second wall, the tariff wall. Let me remind everyone what a tariff is. It's just a tax. It's the name given to a particular kind of tax, namely the tax charged to an American importer when that person brings something produced overseas into the United States to be sold. It means Mr. Trump, a Republican who is against taxes, is proposing an enormous tax increase. And while he keeps saying he's hitting the Chinese with a tariff, it's not the Chinese who pay for tariffs. It's Americans. The American importer will pay much more. And that person will then charge more to the consumer, you and me. And you know what that means? An inflation, which he can't have. Yet he proposes these, counting on the American people to be into denial, not to interrogate any of this, to sit there and have debates as if there's something to debate. The debate is a distraction. It's a way of not dealing with your problem because you're too frightened of letting it be debated. lest it go where it might bite you. And we are run by a community of businessmen and women in charge of our corporations, including our mass media, who are not going to do it. Mr. Trump's economic proposals, whatever else you think of them, are economically incoherent. It's great advertising. I'm protecting you with my walls. It's wonderful. But when it comes now to governing, it's impossible and it's a bad joke. And the whole world is watching. And while it's watching this bad joke unfold, the gap between the United States and the G7 on one hand, and the People's Republic of China and the BRICS on the other, deepens. The United States' effort to stop, block, undercut China have failed. Been doing it now for 15 years. Started big time under Obama. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so the question is, what? Do you keep doing it? Let me conclude by reminding all of us of the early history of the United States, in which your city, Boston, was such an important player. When the United States' people wanted to become independent of George III, the dominant king of the great British Empire, it ended up in a war, the War of 1774, 5, and 6, our Independence War. And to the surprise of everybody, the British lost. In 1812, they tried again, and they lost again. After that, the British decided, okay, we'll have to work out an arrangement. And the United States arrangement was, you're independent. You can take Latin America. That was the Monroe Doctrine that happened a few years after that. And Britain took the rest. Asia, Africa was theirs. They avoided a war after that for a century. What will the United States do? Continue its denial of what's going on? Threaten, as they have, China with war, despite the fact that China has nuclear weapons and the Russians do too, and they are now allied in good part because of the United States? Or are we going to sit down and work something out? Are we going to tell the American people, honestly, our empire is declining? The next one looks to be Chinese. Or if it isn't Chinese, it's going to be a multinational replacement for the kind of dominance that the Persians or the Dutch or the British or the Americans operated. The world is changing very fundamentally. We are living, as I said a half hour ago, at a time of enormously profound change. And our job as Americans is to stop behaving childishly in this game of thinking that the problems I've barely sketched don't have to be worried about, because we can continue to act as if we were in charge in the way we were in the 1960s and 70s. We aren't. Nothing like that. We are, the war in Ukraine is lost. For those of you who don't keep track, is over, except for signing the documents. Russia won, Ukraine and the West lost. The war in Gaza isolates the United States. Indeed, what historians will say when they look back on this time will be that the United States undertook to isolate and neutralize the dangers after World War II. First in the Soviet Union, then in China, then in the global socialist world, nowadays in what are euphemistically called authoritarian societies. But the end result of the plan to isolate the rest of the world going through these efforts was to isolate the United States itself. We and Israel are standing all alone in that part of the world. And the Europeans, whose world is collapsed, they're economically a basket case. And you know why? What the major reason is that Europe is gone as a player? Because they relied on two things: exporting to China, which the Chinese don't need, and cheap energy from Russia, which they have turned away from. So the energy costs make European production uncompetitive. They have to pay too much for energy, and they can't sell in China the way they once did. They're done. Germany, which used to be the engine of European growth, is now the laggard dragging it down. It really is extraordinary, folks, that what you have thought about and assumed is now over. And it takes courage, but also a sense of realism to say, now we are going to talk honestly about our situation and try to find a livable way forward. The alternative, well, I don't want to spell it out. You can figure it out for yourself. But I hope you will not hold against me that I have told you how this situation really is, rather than comforting you with more denial. But if I have failed, which I understand I may well have, then I have good news for you. If you want to wallow in denial, just turn on the radio and the television, and this evening it will all go away as you get told that the great issues of our time are those carefully excluding everything I have told you. Thank you very much for your attention. I really admire what the community church in Boston stands for, what it always has. I'm proud to have been invited. The list of folks on those cassettes that Dean showed us a few minutes ago puts me in extraordinarily revered company. And
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wolff. That was illuminating. So, this is just a short excerpt of a much larger presentation, which goes into more deeper detail about the real issue. But the problem here is, and this is what we're trying to highlight, you're going about this wrong. This is, this MAGA thing is just BS. You build bridges, not walls. You want to have a good relationship with your wife, your girlfriend, your child, your family, your neighbor, your community. You do it by building bridges, not walls. Isolation will not work. Using force and being a bully is not the way to go about building bridges and good relationships. Starting wars and fighting people is not a good way to build bridges and a good, progressive, positive route for all the people. Just makes no sense. So you got a choice here now. Now you've become aware of the situation in a more more realistic manner of what's really going on, like shedding the onion, the outer peel, so you can see better. Because nobody wants to look at the truth. Nobody wants to deal with the truth. They want to live in a glorified way of living, and denial. The sooner you rally together in an uplifting, progressive manner and support each other and actually do what needs to be done and create allies and work together, then you're off to the races. It's up to you. It's your decision. You have free will, free choice. And unfortunately, not for me. I'm not in the U.S. But we're all affected by these things around the world. And you just don't get it. So I'm just going to leave that with you. I'm going to be providing more information as we go along. But remember, build bridges. Walls don't serve anybody. Build bridges. Talk to you all soon. Love and peace to everyone. And before I get much further away, remember, the next screen is an important thing. Instead of watching the news and getting distracted from the truth of things, or some advertiser that's trying to friggin' dig deeper into your pocket to sell you something you don't need, do what these next two characters on the next screen are going to do. Thanks, love and peace to everyone. Talk to you all soon. Ciao for now.